that's kind of officially ends our program. But if our speakers and presenters can stay on, we can just open it up for a few questions. I know this is a topic that's of really broad interest in so many ways. At the same time, there are a lot of kind of direction, confusion, kind of coalition building. There are challenges of kind of equity and potential discrimination, and so on. So I just want to open it up and see where we go from there. I hope our speakers from earlier this afternoon can also join for this conversation. So I'll ask the first question, which is this conversation about what do we need now? Is it the user journey and efficiency, or do we need health passport? Because both these systems are not going to be deployed overnight. It'll still take a few weeks, even potentially a few months. We have very good experience from exposure notification apps. It took between 3 to 6 months after technologists like us were completely ready for them to be deployed. So these things take longer than we think. So I just want to kind of open it up. Maybe start with Brian A and Brian B. We need to use W3C credentials at every stage. And how do you see this kind of helping the ecosystem in general?
You want to go first, Brian B?
Sure, I'll go first. Look, I think if we were here 6 months ago, we'd be a lot better off, right? Vaccinations are happening now. People are getting their cards. It's going to be tough to actually reach people who've already been vaccinated if you want to pull them into a system like this. They will if they have to do this to get on a plane to go to a country. They will if they have to do it to get into Disneyland, right? They will if they have to go back to work. So there's a tremendous amount of time pressure to be able to, particularly in the back to work scenario, get that in place. And I don't begrudge anybody who sacrifices portability, interoperability, or the kind of vendor neutrality kind of thing that I think is important here in order to get something implemented pretty quickly, as long as we avoid creating a legacy that's going to be hard to migrate away from. So there are these foundational technologies like verifiable credentials that are pretty well set. There's not really a big question about how those need to work. There's others that build on top of that, like the DID specifications and something called DIDCOM, which is a standard protocol for your wallet to talk to my wallet, to present credentials, to sign other credentials, that sort of thing. But we need a commitment from the technology industry to converge on a longer term picture that actually puts us in a best spot for the next major time we have to go and vaccinate everybody. And looking at the mutation rate for COVID-19, I worry we'll have to look at this again inside of the next year or two. We certainly will have to do booster shots at least in a couple of years for this current strain, right? And really, we should be committed to trying to get this disease to be like smallpox, something we see the back end of, rather than something like the flu that we'll have to persist with for, indefinitely. So I'd like us to focus on doing it just enough now to solve the immediate problems, but keeping an eye towards how do we really solve this together and create a capacity inside of public health authorities and a capacity in the industry to solve this for real.
I completely agree with Brian. My only additional comment would be I've, in many exercises in this space before, I've seen success when we focus very specifically on use cases and use case development and aligning the specific partners around, in this case, a credential around the specific use case. And it involves the airlines and the schools, but it also involves the individual using the credential and having an experience that is as delightful as possible. But it also involves using what Brian is rightly describing, importantly, the existing infrastructure, empowering public health officials, working with health systems to make all of that work and come together, and having a clear set of requirements and I think aligned principles, right? Like the W3C standard, like ensuring that we're not increasing any sense of a digital divide, that we're bringing this kind of technology to underserved communities. So I think those are the important things to consider, Ramesh, as we move this out and look for broad adoption.
Yeah. Vitor or others, any thoughts?
I agree. I think in the end, it's going to be all about how well these apps can talk to each other and how easy it is for governments, agencies, and bigger corporations to implement these protocols into their own tools. This is key for the deployment, the short term and long term.
Yeah. Brian A., given that you are, a medical doctor as well, do you see some kind of a divide between kind of the public health data sets like the IIS and BAMS and IZs versus the apps and the user-facing aspect of it? Because, the public health digital systems are all about using, the name and date of birth and, name of your favorite color, all of that as part of the database to get it going. On the other hand, a lot of the things we're talking about here are privacy preserving or at least de-identified.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of work needs to be done to connect these kinds of consumer-driven or individual-driven efforts with the traditional infrastructure that we have in place. I think it affords a lot of exciting opportunities. The individuals in our society, I argue, scale much more than the 60 or so registries that we have. We have 330 million individuals. We can enable and empower those as sources of verifiable data into registries, into the IZ gateway, into VAERS, into VAMS, into vSafe. That will afford us a degree of surveillance to ensure efficacy and safety that we don't have as part of the current surveillance networks. And so I think a lot of work needs to be done, but I think it's going to have benefit on the tail end. And you've identified some of the the strong identifiers and how we go about that as just one example, Ramesh.
Yeah. So just I don't think you answered the question. So do you think we're going to live these two parallel worlds where public health IT systems will continue to emphasize name and date of birth, and then everything else we do in the technology world will somehow figure out a way to do this in a de-identified way?
It's a great question. I honestly don't know the answer. I certainly want to. I mean, I come down on the camp of wanting to, I think, frankly, disrupt the current infrastructure with the kind of consumer scalable driven methods that we're describing here. There is a way to do that safely, I think, and in partnership, much like what Brian B. is doing with the public health authorities, to enable them with the kinds of tools and APIs and technology to be able to do that kind of identification work that we do in the consumer space and have been doing for quite some time. It will take some work though, but I think that's where I see us going. Hopefully I answered your question, Ramesh.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, you have both hats on, so we are picking on you. Another point that comes up quite a bit, and James, would love to hear your thoughts as at IDEO you think about kind of the user experience and kind of human-centered design. And you have worked on many systems, so you and as well, Uni is here as well, Uni Chase from IDEO. I'm just thinking about this kind of the user journey aspect of it. And, kind of just from where you sit from IDEO, what are the right ways to engage the user? Because on one hand, paper cards are kind of easy to absorb, easy to use, but apps are kind of, this cool thing that people might say, hey, this is something that's magical. Maybe, this is going to somehow save my life or keep my health, digital health life as fancy as my life on e-commerce or banking. So this spectrum of keeping it low tech, but possibly effective to all the way to apps. How do you see that user journey in this complex vaccination round?
I mean, my initial sort of response to that is that, there isn't necessarily a solution that fits for everyone. Like there are people who have a very comfortable relationship with technology and their devices, and they've kind of come to grips with what the realities of privacy on the internet are, even if we're promising something better than what they might experience elsewhere. I think there are a lot of folks that would accept the convenience and the at least like personal centralization in their own life over what might be the burdensome way of carrying around a card that you have to keep track of, and managing stamps and so on. And then there are obviously people on the opposite side of the spectrum, people who really need these vaccines badly, who don't want anything to do with the technology, or just aren't comfortable enough with it, or maybe they're comfortable with using the devices but not in this context. So I feel like the idea of kind of opening up the conversation to people through a physical piece and allowing them to kind of choose their path that way seems like a way of maybe grabbing the most people. If the initial way that you become aware of this is through a physical campaign, maybe there is a digital campaign that accompanies it, but allowing people to have an equal experience that doesn't really leave anything behind, you're able to choose based on your level of comfort, seems like the ideal for me.
Yeah, even at airline check-in counters, you can always see there's always a significant fraction of people who want printed boarding passes. It just makes them feel like, hey, I actually have a seat, in case my battery runs out or something like that. So that's that's kind of an interesting point. How do you see it, Brian B, on this low tech versus apps and so on?
Yeah, so I'm on the Technical Advisory Council for ID 2020, which has been operating now for a couple of years, focusing on identity approaches for scenarios like refugee camps, or for social work in underprivileged, other underprivileged circumstances. And there you have to design, in fact, it's been a core part of the requirements for people who don't have devices. They have, they don't have smartphones, even if they do have phones, those sorts of things. And so you need systems that can devolve to paper, and where somebody can just carry a card with them if they need to, and that is it's tough, right, though, because if it's just paper based, there's certain use cases that might be forestalled. If we want to address the traceability requirement and avoiding this kind of super cookie problem, then we want to make sure that when you present a credential, if you can present it kind of in a case by case way, or different credentials for the different settings that you're in, that's a lot more secure. Something that's tailored to the situation. It's a lot more secure than showing the same string that can be, copied by hostile actors and used to connect you. So you have to look at this holistically, for sure. You do have to be able to design to go and meet the full population where they're at. I don't think we should be afraid of technology and adopting that, or take a Luddite kind of approach to it, but we should be skeptical, and we should be skeptical about the power dynamics that that currently exist today in the internet, and try to avoid kind of the centralizing effect that some approaches might take versus others. So I think you do have to design for everybody, and address people's concerns about trust, whether digital or analog or otherwise.
Yeah. Anna, one of our world's experts in credentials and identity, what's your experience in the real world scenarios where, you have options between something that could work for the masses but is low tech and could have issues like traceability, versus high tech that could appeal to a smaller population but is more secure? What's been your experience? Any analogies you have some other fields where rapid deployments has faced these hurdles?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
So I think that a lot of these cryptographic possibilities are new, but they're on the cusp of getting widespread use. And especially in the last few years, we've seen cryptography popularized with technologies like Bitcoin, to the point where people are feeling a lot more comfortable with the concept. So I think that even as Brian said, there are some populations that are more comfortable with paper-based things, and some populations that are more comfortable with apps. I think that we are at a point where people have come to understand that there is such a thing as unforgeable credentials, and that they can exist on both on paper and in an app. And usability is kind of a separate concern. Designing it, like James outlined, having a good design that is that people understand how they're supposed to use it. I think that's the important question: is can we step aside from the technology and think from the point of view of the user? And are we making the technology so straightforward that the user can just say, oh, I like carrying something in my wallet, I'm going to use paper. Oh, I prefer to do everything on an app, so I don't have to like look for my piece of paper. And then they don't give it a second thought. And I think that that should be our goal. And whatever complicated stuff is happening under the hood, whatever privacy preserving features we put in there, this is something that we can communicate to the population. We can pat ourselves on the back, but ultimately, the most users are not even going to think about it. They're just going to say, oh, this is the way I'm doing it because that's the way my best friend is doing it. And so I'm just copying whatever they're doing, or whatever other private reasons they might have for it. They're like, oh, I'm going to use the app because I really like the little cute little icon that you put in there. And whatever reasons that they have for doing what it is that they're doing should just work just fine for us. And as far as the crypto, everything that's under the hood, I definitely wanted to give a shout out to Brian's work in the Hyperledger and just the kinds of things that are in that software library. That's a really damn impressive software library that you guys have put together. I mean, it has very advanced cryptographic tools, things that are state of the art that needed to be implemented so that we can all use it. I mean, it's there. It's amazing. So I think that I have very, very high hopes for this entire piece of the puzzle. All of these pieces of the puzzle fitting together and making the world a better place.
Continuing on that thread, there's a question in the online chat as well on the technology side, which is, we're talking about somebody has to certify, somebody has to give the credentials. A simplified version would be a state or CDC could do it. A decentralized version could get pretty messy very quickly. What's the thinking there? Victor, I know you have worked in this space. Brian, of course, Hyperledger has. What's the philosophy in the vaccination space? Are we thinking there are, a dozen of these players or thousands of such players? And how's that going to play out, Brian?
Are you talking about the registries, the IISs, or?
I'm talking about who gives the credentials, who can certify the credentials.
Who can certify?
Highly decentralized or just a few handful of entities?
Well, it's it's got to federate down at the level of a state or a country, but it also has to be shareable between countries, right? If my use case is that I get a vaccination in California from a clinic that's probably authorized by the California Department of Public Health, but wants to interoperate with other states, and so there's some involvement in the CDC at a kind of lightweight layer. But I want to use it to board a plane to Canada and then attend a concert. I want those trust frameworks to be transitive, right? I want the United States and Canada to be able to agree enough on kind of common principles for who qualify as issuers of these kinds of vaccination records, so that the border authority in Canada trusts that. And then I'd like within Canada there to be enough trust between those authorities and the people who validate those credentials to attend a concert or whatever, that it's basically transitive, right? And it looks something a little bit more like the PGP Web of Trust model than necessarily looks like the TLS certificates and the browser hierarchies, or even more decentralized than the domain name system. The domain name system that we have today through ICANN, and that is about as close as we get to the most lightly federated, push all the hard work and the complexity to the edges and have a core that is very lightweight. And I think that's what we can get to with organizations like the WHO playing a lightweight role in orchestrating and authorizing connections between the trust frameworks and kind of green lights to different standards devised elsewhere, devised at MITRE, devised at W3C, but also saying, hey, this is kind of good stuff, and maybe IATA should pay attention to this, and kind of building up kind of organically how those work. There'll be a lot of pressure for that interop as soon as people are back on planes again and wanting to attend conferences and that sort of thing in foreign countries. There'll be a lot of pressure to converge, and what we hope happens is that it's an organic kind of thing, much like the way the internet came together, with just enough lightweight coordination between entities to make it happen quickly. The harder question is that grassroots bootstrap. It's where I really like the coupon approach, because I think that does bootstrap things very quickly. Just figuring out how to do that in a way that meshes with privacy and the trust framework questions is I think a challenge I'm eager to work on with you, Ramesh and Brian and all the rest of you.
Yeah, we are almost at the top of the hour. If Vitor or Abhishek, if you have questions, I have one more question, which is this notion of, you call it kind of a lightweight federation. So are you, Brian, this back to you, are you imagining a credentialing scenario where there is either WHO is kind of like the ICANN, and then there's kind of a second layer of certifying entities, and then everybody kind of hangs off of that?
I'll just say we need to find ways to approach this with minimum viable governance to avoid the need to have too much structure at the center. And fortunately for us, although usually it's unfortunate in other circumstances, the healthcare systems of the world are highly fragmented, highly distributed, highly pushed to the edge. Even in the United States, it's much more in the states and the counties than it really is on the CDC and FDA in terms of a coordinating a top-down kind of effort. Maybe that's even changing a little bit after, in about 24 hours, we'll see a different tone in Washington. But even there, I think they'll be most effective if they say, right, we're not coming in to tell everyone how to do their business. We're coming in to make the most of the distribution that we have today and how things are run, and looking for opportunistic ways to align everybody. Minimum viable, but get to, at its heart, we don't need to be talking about sharing full health records. We don't need to be talking about really high degrees of trust. Really, the more we practice data minimization, the easier it will be to federate a trust network.
Good. Vitor, Abhishek, any final thoughts or questions?
One quick question I had was around like the usability of this whole ecosystem beyond vaccination, because some of these things we are doing here can extend to normal health records beyond vaccination. So maybe question to Brian, where do you see, especially with the identities and related stuff?
I was going to defer to Brian Anderson on that, because I feel like as the MD, he's probably better. But did he drop?
He just dropped.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So I spent 2 years working for the Department of Health and Human Services on trying to make health records more portable. I know that's been a holy grail for the health industry for 40 years. I know that's sometimes been stymied by some of the major health record software vendors out there. But also, like, the real issue has been trust. These records flying around, deeply PII, perhaps the most sensitive PII possible. People have appropriately been concerned about not wanting to make that too liquid, too easy to share those things, right? But trust has been the forgotten ingredient in internet architecture for so long. So if we do it, we have to just have a much higher degree of trust when it comes to information sharing, and centering that on the patient, on the caregiver, on the individual, rather than centering it on the HIE or on the insurance company or on the clinic or on the health net, on the provider network, is critical to building that trust, I think. So if we can get to that, and the patient is the center of health information exchange, I think we'll be able to get to richer sharing of health records. But if we hold that up as the standard for doing VAX records, that may be hard. We may be aiming for the perfect when the good enough is around the corner.
Certainly. All right. So I think we're at the top of the hour. So we appreciate you all joining. And please continue to join the conversation at our Slack channel, tiny.cc/pathcheck Slack. We'll be back next Tuesday, January 26th at the same time, to hear about work going on, of course, in paper cards and verifiable credentials for the whole user journey, as well as work in simulation and modeling and dashboards of keeping track of vaccination, some of the privacy preserving aggregation work that Abhishek was hinting at, and other collaborations that are emerging in simulation modeling and prediction as well. So I want to thank all our speakers and who participated, as well as many organizers and teams that have brought this show together. We'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you.